People live, so be kind, and also just before we get started, a few things to get off my chest. I'm not here to revolutionize PMM like Louis, so just manage your expectations. That was great, by the way. And also, yes, I did plan my entire presentation so I could use this picture. Because every time I see it or every time we change direction, I think of, oh my God, pivot, 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 pivot. So show of hands, I already have a good idea of who's B2B, who's B2C, but show of hands, who had to reposition something in the last couple of years? Oh, thank God. Okay, we're all in the same boat. And maybe you've got a beautiful blouse on. Was your hand up? Did you have to reposition? Oh, was it me? Yeah. What did you have to reposition? Oh, sorry, jacket.
Yeah, well, we had to reposition like all our value props, because we were very product focused, and then we positioned ourselves to vertical focused.
Okay. So you had to reposition all your value props because from product focus to vertical. And
Exactly.
what were the influences? What did you notice? What pushed you to do this pivot, to change and reposition?
Well, I can say that we did very good productification, and we wanted to go to the next level and put more value, and and put our audience in the center of our value props.
Okay, so you're best friends with Louis.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. But for those of you who maybe didn't hear, they wanted to take their positioning to the next level, and they wanted to make sure that they had value at the very center of it and they were communicating the right value. Well, there are a number of reasons why you might need to pivot or reposition. So there's a downward trend in sales, constantly keeping an eye. We've got an industry shakeup, and I've purposefully kept the word disruption off of there, but that could be a shakeup that you yourself are bringing to the market, something interesting, something unique, something super different that's going to change the game. You've got a disconnect maybe from what your marketing is saying and what the customer is really feeling, the pain points that they're actually experiencing. Your value prop's outdated. Or maybe you need to pivot away from a confusing, or what do we look like in the complete unknown, and I hate using the phrase new normal, but also what do we look like in the new world and how do we fit in the new normal? Yeah. Glad you appreciated that. So we're not all just going to reposition and position without any guidelines or any frameworks. And so I've got three of, they're different gospels, they're different churches that people will worship in. Louis obviously potentially, and I think someone else mentioned April Dunford, in the April Dunford Church of Product Positioning. On the far left-hand side, this was the first book that I ever read on positioning. It's a classic by Al Reese and Jack Trout, very much more on the brand marketing side of things, goes really deep into thinking through the noise and cutting through that and how you can really prove value through your advertising messages. Wherever I see that cover, the only thing that repeats in my mind is if you're not first, you're last, and maybe that's not a great takeaway. But then also so that I'm invited back next year, I'm putting in the PMA toolkit. If you haven't seen it, incredibly valuable videos, frameworks, articles. And what I wanted to focus on is I'm a complete worshipper of April Dunford and in the April Dunford Gospel and Church. And I love how she defines positioning, and which is how your product is a leader at delivering something that a very well-defined set of customers care a lot about. And positioning be a set of components. So it's not necessarily just a sentence that you're filling in words to, and then you deliver that piece of paper to the rest of your organization, and you're away, your positioning is done. It's rather components that have different impact on your business and are made up of about 5, and then a bonus 6 things. So in the top left hand, we've got competitive alternatives. So while that might be your direct competitors, people who you're losing market share against, the sort of he who shall not be named kind of brands, it's also what would you be doing if your customer if there was no product that existed, if your competitor didn't exist. I like thinking of the example of like QuickBooks. If you're an SME and you're using that to balance your books, if that didn't exist, I guess you'd be on Microsoft Excel. And then your key unique attributes. So what makes you special? What can you do that no one else can, that your competitors can't? And those map directly to the value that you drive for your customers. In the bottom left, you got your target market characteristics. Buyers that are, what are the things that they have, what is consistent? And then the market category, and this can sometimes shoot you in the foot. If you are a specific company that, let's say you work around email and you maybe put yourself in the CRM category, but you're actually much more powerful than that. You're a lot stronger than that. You've now put yourself in a category and everyone's going to compare you to Salesforce, the biggest, ugliest, biggest, strongest in the market. But maybe you should actually be put into a different category, maybe a chat category where you have a little bit more room to stand out. And then relative trends, that's the bonus one that I've added on, which I like to use the example of working in the new normal, this hybrid situation. It's a trend that we're seeing globally. How does that maybe add a bit of urgency, a bit of nuance, a bit of excitement to what you're talking about, what your customers might be feeling? So if you are, let's say, a web-based platform that helps dispersed teams collaborate on a whiteboard that's digital, the fact that your teams are now maybe dispersed across multiple countries, that makes it a lot easier. That's been a relative trend that's influenced that. And so initially what I was planning to do was think through some brands or some products who've done a really good job in pivoting and reposition how they've done that. But there are a lot of awesome, I didn't want to make any, so I decided to focus rather on, so there is no question, and Uber PMM hat. Wow, no one wanted to take a chance? Thank you.
Haven't they spent a lot of money on legal fees making sure they're very not represented as a taxi company, right? But that they are a marketplace platform.
Okay, so if no one heard, they spend a lot of money making sure that they're known not as a taxi, but as a marketplace. Great. And if you were to sort of maybe expand on that, how do you think today Uber would like people to think of them? How do you think they'd like to be positioned in the market? As a service, as a marketplace. Oh, at the back.
Travel provider. It was announced yesterday that they're actually going to go into
Travel provider. It was announced yesterday that they're going to go into travel. Thank you for reading the news and for having the, for being brave enough to stick your hand up. I appreciate both of you. So, as I said, there's no wrong answer to this because Uber is probably still figuring exactly out how they position themselves. When I started with Uber in 2015, they were very much a transport company and wanted to be positioned as exactly what you were saying, this marketplace where you could tap a button, get a ride, get from A to B. But the company went through a lot of change and needed to rapidly pivot and figure out how are we going to make money, how are we going to expand our service, and how are we going to head towards that IPO in 2019? And so you probably already know the answer to this. We've also had a spoiler in terms of the other pivot that they've been doing. But Uber Eats, the company noticed, right, we've got this dead hour at around lunchtime when no one's really in a car driving around, but we've got some drivers who are idle. They're not making any money. But what if we tried delivering food? We've got the driver base who are already there. We've got some restaurants who will get on the platform, some favorites from local cities. and let's give that a try. And that started to work, obviously, as we know. Uber Eats became very well-known in the category, and that was their pivot, right? So they're no longer just transport, but it's tap a button, get a ride, tap a button, get your meal. And we also know that they pivoted further into freight with Uber Freight, which later they sold off to Sender. But it was this constant pivoting around how to expand the portfolio, how to stay relevant, how to make money, how to become profitable. Bring it out. But if we look back at these 6 key components to positioning: competitive alternatives, key unique attributes, value, target market characteristics, market category, and the relative trends. What would this look like for Uber? Well, the main competitors, I already mentioned that they've now pivoted into different categories. So the main competitors are those single category players. Initially, when Uber first started as a ride-sharing company, they were going up against taxis. They worked, as you pointed out, really, really hard not to be seen as a taxi company. But now they're in grocery delivery, they're in food delivery, and you've got a lot of B2C really well. So those are some of their biggest competitors. What do they do, though, that makes them very different? What sets them apart? Well, Uber's tried to lean very heavily into the power of the platform, being this, hate to use the word, but super app of where you can tap in and see, okay, I can get a ride and I can also order my meal so that by the time I get home, my meal will be there. And while I'm at it, I can book my flights to Croatia and my hotel stay, apparently. So that's what they're trying to add as their key attributes that are going to differentiate them from everyone else. And so what does that really mean for the user? Well, they think the assumption there is that you've got safety, which is a big value driver for users, especially when it comes to ride sharing. Uber spent lots of money and time and tech to develop one of the safest platforms out there. And also that tech component, which makes it easier to know that, okay, well, they've got potentially the ability to give me some discounts if I'm a loyal rider, or they can see that I'm coming home and they've worked it out that if I order right now, tap my button, I can get my food delivered to home just in time. But ultimately, the characteristics that remain consistent across all those different categories is that that the key buyer wants it fast and it wants to be reliable. You don't want to get left out in the cold, in the rain, on the side of the road, and you don't want your poke bowl to arrive without the salmon. But the market categories that they're playing in are interesting because you've got transportation, you've got delivery, and you've got grocery. They haven't tried to carve necessarily out their own category and play as the main player in that. They're taking on all those really strong competitors in each different category. And I spoke earlier about the relative trends, and this was something that certainly rose with the growth of Uber, is that on demand. We now probably feel it a lot more. It's kind of like old news, but tap that instant gratification, tap that button, let that car arrive, tap that button, let your whatever doorbell ring and your groceries are there, your meal is there. The lady at the back mentioned that they're moving into travel, and I found that really interesting because this is obviously a very B2C example. That's where my experience lies. But I made my own pivot into a company that was a little bit more B2B, well, a lot more B2B focused, which is Trip Actions. And for those of you who don't know, and as my new TomTom friends assumed, we are not actually a GPS service, which I thought was actually quite a good guess. But Trip Actions, for those of you who don't know, was, actually let me do it this way. A lot of you traveled in today, and you might have had to book that travel in your personal capacity, where you probably went onto a booking.com or an Expedia and booked your tickets that way, probably paid out of pocket. Trip Actions is a managed travel service for your business travel management needs. So it's built with tech first. It's software as a service, and it's there to streamline the entire experience of your business travel, but making it consumer grade. So having this really mobile experience where you've got the app on your phone, not having to pay out of pocket and then awkwardly reimburse it and expense it. It's all happening in the platform for you. You've got access to the best hotels, you've got access to all the flights that you need, trains, cars, etc. And what I found, and the reason that I pivoted into working for TripActions, and what I found really compelling about the company was it was travel, and it was doing really, really well. They had amazing investors, they had a phenomenal valuation, and then COVID hit. And no one was going anywhere. And the revenue for April 2020 for the company was $0. I'm sure that resonates with a lot of the audience today, because I think that impact was felt quite widely. But for a travel company or a B2B company that was managing travel for its customers, and we had some big logos up there, Zoom, Pinterest, Loom, there was $0 coming in. So how did the company pivot? And that's what actually really inspired me. Well, they realized that the journey was end-to-end. You were traveling, but you were also spending money. You were spending often your own money, or if you were fortunate enough, you had a credit card. But what if they could capture that spend and put that spend through their own systems and earn some money off of that? Especially if you think about, we might not be moving around the world during the middle of a pandemic, but you might need to set up your office infrastructure, your home office infrastructure. Imagine if you could have a credit card and that payment could go through and you could set that all up yourself. Or imagine you needed to put your Slack software through that payment. We could earn back on that. But the best part about it was that you wouldn't have to submit an expense within your own platform to submit my expenses. I literally knew the head of finance's name personally, and that's not because I was a useful member of the Uber staff. But this was a hugely compelling pivot for me, and it was something that I thought was incredibly well done, especially if you looked at the entire user journey. Imagine that, you're booking your flights, you're traveling, you're tapping your phone because you got the card on your Apple Wallet. You don't even need a physical card anymore, and then you didn't have to submit your expenses. So let's bring up this again. And what does this look like for TripActions? Well, interesting parallels between the two, because at least when it comes to competitors, TripActions used to be playing in the field where they were only up against legacy players. And these are big giants like Concur, Amex, Egencia. You might not recognize those names, but you might have had to use those systems as an end traveler. Your company might have been using them, and it might have been a really, really painful process. Busy players in the travel space. To see, as with the expense, faster moving, smarter tech companies that will also tech first and that can move really, really fast. And they're managing their payments and expense in a single category. But what we had over and above our legacy players was that we were tech first. So where you might, as a travel manager, have asked your customer success agent, hey, can you give me a download on our travel spend? They'll say, be right with you, take 2 weeks, go back into the data, download a Excel spreadsheet, and send it to you by email. Whereas TripActions, you could tap 2 buttons and have it download or have it in your dashboard. We were tech first, we were smarter, we were faster. And that translated very powerfully into saving time, saving money, and being transparent. And that was something that our key buyers really, really, really wanted to see. And that was across both the travel side and the expense side, having complete visibility and complete control. And so the categories that we're playing in, the market categories, are business travel management and expense management. So 2 different market industries. Again, we had this debate within the company. Do we carve out our own category? Is that something that we want to consider when we're positioning ourselves? Or do we just continue to play in these 2 different categories? One that we're still working out, if I'm honest. But that trend that I spoke about that looks different per category is the power of tech. The power of AI, the power of automation. Those are really key trends that our buyers want to hear more about. And that makes our product more relevant, more interesting, more exciting, and more compelling. So what's the takeaway? I'm going to ask, you're pointing. What do you think, what would be the one from?
Flashbacks to interacting with BCA travel and how much a pain in the behind it is. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that's it relates to my own experience, and
I've also had those flashbacks of Concur, so I feel the pain.
exactly.
But more broadly around pivoting and positioning, what do you think, Louis? You're right in front of me. Key takeaway.
Yeah, I think it's when you look at the entire target customer journey that you can find opportunities for pivoting, right?
Yeah.
You guys looked at the entire business travel journey, not just the booking, but the payment.
Exactly. Thank you. And maybe one step further than that, when it comes to pivoting and positioning and repositioning, we shouldn't necessarily be waiting for a global pandemic, for our sales to drop, for our messaging to feel outdated before we make that pivot. We should constantly be reevaluating our positioning and thinking through, does this make sense? Are we looking at all the pieces of the puzzle? Because that definition, we bring a lot of different pieces of the puzzle together. All sit with, we have the ability to bring through and not stand alone and create the positioning ourselves, but rather bring all the pieces of the puzzle together with different parts of the business. So I hope that you continue to pivot and position and reposition gracefully. I've been Siobhan Blum. I'm from Trip Actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siobhan. I also had flashbacks. I changed jobs to travel industry in February of 2020.
Oh,
Smart decision.
yeah, we'll talk later.
Yeah. Let's dive into questions. The examples you have mentioned seem more of a strategic pivot at the corporate level. What role can a PMM play in these?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's also something that I've noticed, though, is that it's those top-down decisions on a corporate level that end up in the PMM's lap to reposition and to figure out how we're positioning. It's like we're making this strategic corporate decision, go and figure out what this looks like in the market. And so that's why I would advocate to have PMM at the decision-making table, because a lot of what gets decided at that table, PMM has the ability to influence. So it's a great question. I hope I answered it.
What are your thoughts on category creation? What are the pros in a company or a product?
Right. The minute you sort of calling of Salesforce, a lot of hard work kind of get or to feel the pain. And we weighed up the pros and cons. We're like, well, that's a lot of work. If we create a whole new category, there's a lot of legwork we have to do explaining the category, and that might detract from actually what we're trying to sell. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. I think it really depends on the category you're playing in. I think it depends on the product. We saw at the time, we were like, this is not necessarily the smartest decision for us. It's going to be a lot harder for us to recreate a category and land the message and position effectively. But who's to say? We might change our mind. We might pivot in the next few months.
Okay, and let's do one more. How did you communicate to customers the company's pivot so they were aware of the new category you're playing in?
Yeah, so that's where the sales and customer success enablement came in really closely. I think it's aligning very closely those different parts of the business, but also you've got your marketing team, and you're making sure that they're brought along on the journey. I think for us, with Trip Action specifically, we had the opportunity to upsell a lot of our customers who might have been using legacy spend management systems. So that was quite an easy direction for us to go into. But it was leveraging all those different parts of the business, specifically for the existing customers, our customer success teams.